Hi, everyone. We will get started in just a moment. There are two QR codes on the slide here, and if you would please take some time to fill them out. We have one for patients and caregivers and one for healthcare providers, and these surveys are really important for improving this program and helping us find new topics and new things that might be interesting for people to learn about in culinary medicine. So if you would just take a moment to fill them out, and Emma will also share the links in the chat if you're having trouble with the QR codes. Just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our culinary medicine webinar for first one of 2026. We have an amazing topic today. I just have a few housekeeping things to get through before we start. So if you weren't here at the beginning, we have two surveys that we ask you to fill out if you have a moment during the presentation. These surveys help us improve the content and the programming moving forward. So we ask that you scan the appropriate QR code for you and take the surveys if you are able to. Thank you to Shar for sponsoring this session. Shar is the leading sponsor of our culinary medicine sessions, and we are very grateful for their support. Finally, if you are interested in hearing this presentation in Spanish and Portuguese, you can click the globe to get started. There's a globe button on the bottom of your screen if you're viewing the webinar. And we do have live interpreters available for you. If you are a healthcare provider claiming CEUs, please pay attention to this part. I will share this information again, but it can be a little bit complicated if you're new. So these are the instructions for getting your CME or CEU for healthcare providers. You will need to register an account with Boston Children's Hospital in order to receive your transcript. Once you have an account set up, you can text this code P8BKE to the phone number and register your attendance. I will make sure that this information is shared in the chat during the presentation, and we will be recording your attendance as well on our end. So if there are any issues, we can certainly help you with this. And I'll share this again at the end. All right, and with that, I'm going to get into the content. So our topic today is Nourish to Flourish, closing nutrient gaps in the gluten-free diet. And our speakers are here. Our first speaker will be Dr. Nan Du, who's a pediatric gastroenterologist from Boston Children's Hospital. Then we'll hear from Jessica Leibovitz, who's a registered dietitian from the Celiac Disease Center at Columbia University. And then finally, we'll have a cooking demonstration from Vanessa Weisbrod, who is our Chief of Education and Community Engagement at the Foundation. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Nan.
Perfect. Let me get my slides up. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to start things off by reviewing the different nutrient and environmental issues in celiac disease and the gluten-free diet. Before we dive into the nutrient gaps in this gluten-free diet, I wanted to take just a brief step back to review the GI pathophysiology underlying celiac disease. The diagram on the left shows where different nutrients are absorbed along the GI tract. As you can see, the duodenum, the red box is being used to highlight kind of those nutrients, is the critical site for absorbing calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, iron, folate, fat-soluble vitamins, and B vitamins. In celiac disease, gluten triggers this immune response, that then attacks the small intestinal lining, causing damage to the villi, these finger-like projections you see in the image on the right. When villi then become flattened and damaged, the surface area available for nutrient absorption decreases dramatically. And this is why we commonly see specific nutrient deficiencies in untreated celiac disease, such as iron deficiency causing anemia, low calcium and vitamin D causing osteoporosis or increased risk of osteoporosis, deficiencies in folate and B12, which can cause some neuropathy, and then also other nutrients which can cause issues which can cause deficiencies and immune issues. And so while our focus today is on nutrient gaps that can persist even on the gluten-free diet, I do think it's important to first understand these baseline deficiencies that result from the disease pathophysiology itself. Now that we understand the baseline deficiencies from untreated celiac disease, let's talk about what happens when patients start a gluten-free diet. The good news is that the gluten-free diet promotes nutritional restoration. As the intestinal mucosa heals and villi recover, we see improved nutrient absorption, weight gain, and usually a normalization of BMI in most patients, BMI being body mass index. However, recovery can sometimes be incomplete, and this is where understanding the gluten-free diet itself becomes critical. Looking at the data now in the middle, from Bianchi 2024, we can see which nutrients tend to normalize and which remain problematic, even those on a gluten-free diet. And nutrients that generally correct well include B12, calcium, and to some extent magnesium. Studies show that calcium deficiency and vitamin D levels typically improve after starting a gluten-free diet, with bone mineral density increasing significantly, often achieving complete recovery within 1 to 2 years. However, several deficiencies may persist despite adherence to the gluten-free diet, and iron deficiency is a really common one, affecting between 14 to 41% of adults and appearing in 46 to 54% of celiac disease patients who have maybe inadequate intake of iron in their diet. The good news from a pediatric standpoint is that most children, about 84 to 96%, see their anemia improve or resolve on a gluten-free diet. A recent, actually, single center study from Israel showed that most children with newly diagnosed celiac disease and who also had iron deficiency anemia will normalize their ferritin levels, which is a way of how we can measure iron in the body, within 12 months on a well-planned gluten-free diet alone without the need for additional iron supplementation. Zinc deficiency is another concern. It's highly prevalent at diagnosis in both children and adults, and sometimes can have some difficulty restoring well more in adults than in children. Um, and then folic acid and B vitamins can also present sometimes a mixed picture. As well, some patients recover. Deficiencies can also be common, with this huge range in the literature being 35 to 100% of adults showing some inadequate folic intake on a gluten-free diet, though not as great literature for kids. So this really brings us to the key question: why do these deficiencies persist on a gluten-free diet? And that's where we need to kind of look at both sides of the coin, when in terms of nutritional excess and deficiencies that may be inherent to the gluten-free diet itself. So I know there was a lot of text on the other slide, so I just want to kind of to summarize some of the micronutrient changes on the gluten-free diet. Usually you can see a complete resolution on the gluten-free diet of B12, vitamin K, calcium, and magnesium deficiency. Sometimes you can actually see increased rates of folate and B6 deficiency while on a gluten-free diet. And this is something more related to the nutritional composition of the gluten-free diet itself. And then there's also a third category where some will partially resolve on a gluten-free diet, such as those with vitamin A, D, iron, zinc, and copper deficiency. This really, I think, reflects the importance of chatting with a dietitian to ensure that when you are following your gluten-free diet, which can mean many different things, and that many people follow the variations of the gluten-free diet, how to make sure you're incorporating a diverse range of food groups and nutrients to make sure you're not becoming deficient in one way or the other. And I think this pattern really raises the important question of the also important point that I wanted to make, in that how certain gluten-free products are manufactured can also influence why you may see folate and B6 deficiency. And I know many people may be aware of this, but a critical piece of the puzzle is that many people don't realize that gluten-free cereals, grains, and breads are not enriched or fortified the same way that the gluten-containing counterparts are. Since the 1940s, wheat flour in the US has been enriched with thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid, and iron, so some B vitamins and iron, which you can see from like the FDA regulation that I included on the top of the slide. This enrichment program was actually a major public health initiative that dramatically reduced nutrient deficiencies in the general population. However, gluten-free flours and products are not subject to the same enrichment requirements. This means that when patients switch to a gluten-free diet, they may be potentially losing a major source of these B vitamins, iron, and folic acid. And that's also why you saw on the prior side, you may see some specific deficiencies emerging and persisting despite good dietary adherence to the gluten-free diet. And specifically, these gluten-free cereals, grains, and breads can't be enriched, as the term enriched cannot be declared on the label of the gluten-free food that has an equivalent wheat-based product with the standard of identity. I did want to spend just a quick minute specifically on the persistent iron deficiency, since it's probably one of the more persistent problems we see in celiac patients on a gluten-free diet. Iron deficiency in celiac disease has probably actually multiple contributory factors. As we discussed earlier, the damaged intestinal mucosa directly impairs iron absorption, leading to less iron delivery to developing red blood cells, which is then how you get anemia. There is another important mechanism at play, and I'm highlighting that kind of on this picture here. The inflammation triggered by gluten can cause this increased cytokine release, which can then cause the liver to produce something called hepcidin. Hepcidin acts as the body's actually iron regulator. It kind of helps regulate to see how much iron there should be. And how it does that is it can inhibit something called ferroportin, which is a main iron transporter. So it helps get iron around the body. When hepcidin levels are high, iron can get then trapped inside other cells, such as enterocytes, hepatocytes, and macrophages, and then can't be released in circulation where it's needed. So that's another mechanism on how there's less iron available. So there's also another reason, and that ties back to the enrichment, is even after patients start a gluten-free diet and their gut begins to heal, i.e., less inflammation, another reason that you can see persistent iron deficiency is by the inadequate iron content in the gluten-free diet, because some of those gluten-free products are not fortified with iron the way wheat-based products are. So this combination of factors, maybe some residual malabsorption, ongoing inflammation, and lack of dietary fortification, explains why iron deficiency remains a common problem on the gluten-free diet. Given everything we discussed about persistent nutrient deficiencies on a gluten-free diet, monitoring does become pretty important. I'm referencing a 2024 guidelines that were put out by Pinto Sanchez, who they recommend for adults to have yearly nutritional monitoring for all patients with celiac disease. This includes a CBC to check for anemia, ferritin to check for iron stores, folate, B12, fat-soluble vitamins, as well as minerals such as chromium, copper, selenium, and zinc. Also, specifically in the adults, they discuss about DEXA scan, which is a way to look at bone health, and they recommend having a DEXA scan at diagnosis, and if abnormal, getting monitoring every 1 to 2 years, depending on the results. I will say for children, typically the B12, vitamin A, E, chromium, copper, selenium, and zinc, we do not necessarily recommend as that monitoring yet at this time. And usually DEXA scans are usually only recommended in the setting of weight loss or concern for malnutrition. Usually we'd recommend checking iron and vitamin D levels around 6 months. And usually we recommend also starting a gluten-free multivitamin to avoid needing to chase after these micronutrients. But a lot of this should still be in discussion with a dietitian. The other thing is monitoring is also not just about checking labs. When we see persistent nutrient deficiencies despite being on a gluten-free diet, we need to also assess not just adherence to the diet, but also do we need to think of other autoimmune conditions that could be associated, such as thyroid disease or type 1 diabetes, that can also affect the nutritional status. So the key takeaway I think for this is the importance of proactive monitoring, occasionally targeted supplementation, and working with your dietitian and your medical team to ensure there's adequate intake of iron-rich, nutrient-dense foods that are important and part of the long-term celiac disease management. I did also want to spend a few quick minutes also talking about environmental contaminants in the gluten-free diet as well. And you may ask, how does the gluten-free diet get connected to heavy metals? We know that arsenic naturally can bioaccumulate in rice due to contaminated groundwater or parent rock, which then allows arsenic to naturally collect in the roots of rice with phosphate and silica transporters. Inorganic arsenic then gravitates to like the nutrient-rich outer layers of rice grain. And thus, for consumers, rice actually has some of the higher arsenic content of foods that we could be consuming. And rice and slash rice flour is commonly found in 75% of processed gluten-free foods, given that it tends to be the most common gluten substitute. And so we actually, as researchers here, had asked the question, do children with celiac disease have maybe this increased arsenic exposure because of this commonly used gluten-free substitute of rice and rice flour? And so, in this prospective study that we did, where we followed children who had been recently diagnosed with celiac disease, who had been on the gluten-free diet about 6 months, there was a slight increase in urinary arsenic level between that at endoscopy, their diagnostic endoscopy, and after 6 months on a gluten-free diet, but none exceeded CDC maximum tolerable limit. And we don't really know the impact of this mildly increased elevated arsenic exposure. Before you panic, I did also want to just say we also looked at toenail levels, which showed also a slight increase as well, which is a biomarker of slightly longer term exposure. But we were also wondering, does this continue? Is this just like a short term kind of increase and then things normalize? And that's actually what we found. We followed these patients further when we found that while urinary arsenic concentrations were initially slightly high at 6 months, they returned to baseline levels at 12 months, and that they were actually at 12 months, these levels were comparable to the rest of actually the US population and reference data. So I think offers a reassurance that prolonged adherence to the gluten-free diet, even one that may initially contain some higher arsenic concentrations from rice-based food consumption, does not necessarily result in persistent increased arsenic exposure or increasing arsenic accumulation over time. Though I do think we need to continue to follow this because while short-term urinary arsenic levels return to baseline, chronic exposure such as looking at toenails, which look as over a 6 month period, there was still a slight increase, not statistically significant, but a slight trend. And this could be reflecting a limited statistical power due to the smaller follow-ups sample size. So it reinforced with us that there's this question of the role of highly processed gluten-free foods and whether we're seeing this difference in arsenic absorption due to like decreased intestinal permeability. And then when they're healed, they actually are more able to deal with that. Maybe slight increase in their diet were unclear. And so but the key point I want to emphasize is that although gluten-free diets are a risk factor for environmental heavy metal exposure, the effect diminishes after 12 months on a gluten-free diet. The other thing is, and this is how it kind of relates back to in terms of the gluten-free diet, we sometimes categorize it as one thing, but actually many people follow very different variations of the gluten-free diet. And one important thing is to vary your gluten-free grains and to not just eat rice all the time as your gluten-free grain and to make sure you're seeing other alternatives and to talk to your RD and dietitian about that. And so to conclude my section, I hope you guys saw that and I showed that celiac disease begins with some nutrient gaps due to inflammation and impaired absorption. And a gluten-free diet really does help, but it may not correct all the deficiencies. The lack of enrichment of gluten-free grains matters, especially for iron and B vitamins. Diet quality and diversity is essential for both nutrition and safety. And then finally, grain choices and processed foods may influence some exposure to contaminants such as arsenic. And so it's important, that's another reason for diversification. I'm now going to pass things over to Jessica, but happy to answer questions in our Q&A section.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now that we know what we need to add to our gluten-free diet to make it nutritionally complete, I'm going to talk more about practical tips of how we can make that happen. So first off, let's recognize that there are several barriers to consuming a nutritionally adequate diet. There's probably a reason everyone isn't already doing this, right? Why do dietitians even exist? Well, there may be taste preferences related to gluten-free foods or fresh foods. Not everyone loves their gluten-free options. We also know that the food you eat is often influenced by those around you. Oftentimes, your food choices are not solely up to you, but they may be impacted by the attitudes and preferences of your friends and family. Additionally, there may be a lack of knowledge about how to even prepare gluten-free foods, or you may not feel that you have the skills to cook. Next, you may not feel comfortable trying new foods or varying your diet. Other barriers may involve your meal patterns or settings. Are you eating most meals at home, at a family or friend's home, or dining out or taking in food regularly? Food insecurity and availability of gluten-free foods is another issue that we can't overlook. And lastly, kitchen availability, including limited space or appliances, or even a shared kitchen, can be another barrier. I'm in New York City, and I know not everyone has a full kitchen in their apartment. Others have roommates, so that adds another variable to the mix. But with the help of your dietitian, you can work together on strategies to reframe these barriers and make consuming a healthy diet more manageable. So it all starts with meal planning. Setting aside time to meal plan will allow you to map out your week ahead instead of worrying about what to eat each day in the middle of your busy schedule. Creating a meal plan will allow you to ensure you're consuming nutritious meals, saving time, and spending less money. You'll also have more opportunity to experiment with different foods when cooking at home. Start by creating a menu of the meals you plan to make for the week. Account for meals that you will be eating outside of the home, and don't forget to buy food for all of your meals. That includes breakfast, lunch, and snacks too. Make sure to plan out balanced meals for yourself, meals that include a protein, a starch, and a non-starchy vegetable like broccoli or salad greens. Fuel yourself throughout the day to ensure you're energized and not inducing more symptoms for yourself. For example, if you skip lunch, you may be extra hungry for dinner and inclined to eat more and faster, which may result in bloating and discomfort. When putting together our menu, we want to think of variety to ensure you're getting all of the nutrients you need. You can aim to eat the rainbow. This will help you to get a range of different colors in your diet because each color and each type of food will contain its own unique set of nutrients. Consuming a varied diet also helps prevent flavor fatigue, making the diet more enjoyable. Including a variety of gluten-free whole grains will help ensure you consume certain nutrients that you may be missing out on by not eating gluten. And if you are low in certain nutrients, you'll want to focus on including more of these food sources in your diet. As Dr. Dew discussed, some of the main nutrients of concern in celiac disease are vitamin D, calcium, B12, folate, and iron. Food sources of vitamin D include fatty fish such as salmon, mackerel, and tuna. Vitamin D is added to milk and other dairy products as well as orange juice. Cheese and egg yolks naturally contain small amounts of vitamin D as well. Calcium-rich foods include dairy, milk, yogurt, cheese, fortified milk substitutes like soy, nut, or pea, kale, and salmon. And it's important to note that only 500 milligrams of calcium is absorbed at a time, so you want to spread out intake to optimize your absorption. Vitamin B12 is naturally found in animal products, including fish, meat, poultry, eggs, milk, and milk products. Plant-based sources include fortified nutritional yeast and dairy alternatives. Folate deficiency is common in celiac disease, likely related to malabsorption, lower folate content of gluten-free grains, and the lack of fortification or enrichment of gluten-free products. Folate is found in a wide variety of foods, including vegetables, especially dark green leafy vegetables, fruits and fruit juices, nuts, beans, peas, seafood, eggs, dairy products, meat, poultry, and grains. Lastly, dietary iron is in the form of heme or non-heme iron. Heme iron comes from animal sources such as meat, fish, and poultry, and is most readily absorbed by the body. Non-heme iron is found in plant-based foods such as fruits, vegetables, beans, and nuts, and has a lower bioavailability. Many of these sources are animal-based, and therefore, if you are following a vegan or a vegetarian diet, you're going to need to work with your dietitian on strategies to incorporate enough of these nutrients through food or through supplements. So at this point, you can search for various gluten-free recipes. Here's a list of some places to get inspiration from. You can save your recipes so that each week you can look back through your list to help make the decision process easier. To increase variety, create a goal to try out new recipes either weekly, monthly, or as often as you can. Recipes don't have to be complicated or challenging. Simply cooking a new vegetable or grain is a great first step to varying the diet. Once you've completed a recipe, you will likely feel more comfortable with these new foods and cooking skills, and be more willing to try them again. This will add more options to your repertoire and your meal rotation. Also, you'll have more ingredients on hand that will help you to create other new recipes. It's important to remember that you can't get any worse at cooking. You can only get better with more practice. Even if you're starting from square one, any mistakes you make will help you to learn along the way. I was definitely not a skilled cook to start. I think back on when I first made mac and cheese on my own and accidentally made it into a cheese soup. Then, as a dietitian, I was required to take a cooking class in college, and almost every class I pretty much failed to produce an edible version of the recipe we were supposed to present that day. After many years, I wouldn't say I'm close to a chef, but I do absolutely love cooking. I cook various gluten-free recipes all the time and share them on my Instagram, GFreeRD. I hope to inspire others to do the same. There are endless resources for recipes at every skill level. Whether you look online at blogs, recipe websites, or social media, or you prefer hard copies of cookbooks or magazines. I honestly don't usually use specifically gluten-free recipes since it really is easy to switch up any recipe to make it gluten-free. Baking is a bit trickier though, but most of the flour brands I listed have recipes on their websites using their flours. As a dietitian, people may think I just inherently love healthy foods. While I do love vegetables, I absolutely refuse to eat them without flavor. For example, growing up, my mother often made us plain steamed broccoli, which would only inspire a few bites out of me. Once I started cooking on my own, I started exploring broccoli with flavors that I enjoyed. Broccoli with a walnut raisin salsa, with a peanut butter dressing, simply with garlic and red pepper flakes, a cacio e pepe version, or as a slaw with almonds, red onion, and a lemony mayo dressing. I can't get enough of the broccoli in these dishes. Figuring out what flavors you enjoy can help you to make healthy foods more appetizing and get you feeling happier to include more of these foods in your diet. It's important not to rule out a food just because you didn't enjoy it one way, but to explore other options that may work better for you. I usually would say that although I loved cooked broccoli, raw broccoli was not for me. But I recently discovered that raw broccoli slaw I mentioned, and it may be my favorite broccoli dish yet. Once you have your recipes picked out, write down all of the ingredients you need for each recipe. This will become the base of your grocery shopping list. Compile all of these ingredients together along with your grocery needs into one neat list. If you notice you need the same ingredient for multiple dishes, see how you can consolidate them. For example, if two dishes call for part of an onion, you may need to only buy one onion and divide it up. You may want to make your list according to the layout of your grocery store so that you can move smoothly through the aisles. I actually love using the Notes app on my iPhone. It allows you to make a bulleted list. So as I move through the store, I can check off the items I already added to my cart and will then move those to the bottom of the list, only leaving the items I have left at the top until everything is checked off. Here's one example of a meal plan and its shopping list. Sometimes you don't want to eat the same thing 2 days in a row, or you'll find a recipe didn't use the entire container of one ingredient. You can repurpose those ingredients or your leftovers into new meals. Have leftover roast chicken from Sunday night dinner? You can use the leftover chicken for a sandwich for Monday's lunch. Have leftovers from taco night on Monday? Use it to make a taco salad for lunch on Tuesday. Have extra lentil pasta from Tuesday's dinner? Use the pasta for mac and cheese for lunch on Thursday. Okay, we have our list. Now we need to do the grocery shopping. Make sure to shop in advance when you have more free time, such as on weekends and days off. I'll often have my patients pick a day of the week and time that they want to loosely designate for making this list and for grocery shopping. I may suggest even setting a phone reminder to make sure they don't get too busy and forget. When people are really pressed for time, there are other options available. Some grocery stores or services offer delivery or pickup, so someone else is doing the shopping for you. Come prepared with your list and your shopping bags. Avoid shopping on an empty stomach, as we know when we're hungry, our eyes wander and we may want to buy a lot more than we originally planned for. We made this list for a reason, so we really want to stick to it. Aim to shop the perimeter of the store, as this is usually where all the fresh whole foods will be held. But of course, you'll be making purchases throughout the entire store. You're all used to reading ingredient lists for gluten, but you can also review nutrition labels for other helpful information. The nutrient label will show you how many calories, along with how much protein, sodium, fat, fiber, and the specific nutrients we talked about. You can also see how much sugar is in an item. Below it, you will see added sugar, which refers to how much sugar was added to the product that wasn't naturally occurring within the food. But be careful. You want to make sure you're looking at what serving size a label is referring to. Sometimes the amounts will represent the whole package, but most of the time, the serving size will be only a portion of the package. And so you'll need to figure out how much you are actually eating and how does that compare to the serving size on the label. You may need to do some calculations to get a more accurate estimate of how many calories and how much protein, sodium, fat, fiber, and sugar you're taking in. When you look at the ingredient label, you can see what ingredients are included. Ingredients are listed on products in descending order by weight so that the first ingredient is always present in the largest amount. So for example, if you're buying a chicken dinner, you would hope that chicken would be the first ingredient and not sugar. You can also look at the ingredients to see if they include whole grains over refined grains. The fiber content will be a good clue for this as well. Don't be afraid of canned or frozen fruits or vegetables. These can be just as nutritious as your fresh counterparts and may help you to have these foods on hand without them going bad. Once we have all of our ingredients, you may decide that meal prepping is helpful to make your week easier. Consider preparing certain foods in bulk, like a large tray of roasted vegetables or quinoa, to last for several days. Or simply chop up certain vegetables or fruit ahead of time. This could be helpful for healthy snacks that are all ready to go, or getting a head start on certain meals you'll be cooking later on in the week. Cooking in bulk will also help to reduce preparation time right before the actual meal when you may be busier after a long day. Now let's talk about when you're dining out. I highly recommend researching restaurants that have options that you'll be happy with. There's a lot of resources out there like the Find Me Gluten-Free and Atlee apps. Consider checking out the menu ahead of time so you can be somewhat prepared with what you want to order. When you're choosing what to order at a restaurant or for takeout, we want to think about balancing our plate. So as I mentioned before, we want to think about what our protein is, your starch, your non-starchy veggie. And if your main dish doesn't include a veggie or a protein, you may want to order a side to make the meal complete, and you can save extras for leftovers. Also, delivery fees have become increasingly expensive. You may benefit from ordering a few different dishes at one time that can make for more than one complete balanced meal for your week. You can also use dining out as a great way to try new foods that you wouldn't necessarily cook yourself. Just like when you go to the grocery store, you don't want to show up to a dinner out too hungry. This may lead you to choose less nutritious options, eat too much, or eat too quickly. It's okay to have a snack before dinner so that you're not starving by the time your food comes. You can think about a hunger scale. 1 being so hungry you could eat a horse, and 10 being so stuffed you never want to eat again. We want to try to avoid the extremes because that's where the problems will happen. Try to enter each meal at a 4 when you're comfortably hungry and ready to eat, but not ravenous that you'll eat too quickly. And end a meal at a 6 where you're comfortably full and satisfied, but not overly stuffed. On that note, make sure to fuel yourself throughout the day. You don't want to save up for this meal, as this often backfires and can result in higher calorie intake and potentially more symptoms like reflux, bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Listen to your hunger cues. Restaurant portions are often large, so if you realize that you're becoming full, so feeling like you're at a 6, and if you keep going, you may reach a 7, 8, or 9, consider bringing some home for leftovers. This will save you time and money and allow you to enjoy the food another time. Lastly, and most importantly, enjoy yourself. We know that eating out with celiac disease can be stressful in itself. Savor the good food and enjoy your time with others. And although we prioritize getting our nutrients from food first, there are specific cases where micronutrient supplementation may be necessary. This is where you want to work with your providers to review your diet and nutrient labs. If you and your providers decide that you're unable to meet your needs through food alone, then you should discuss what type of supplement and how much is recommended. Our team of doctors and dietitians at Columbia University came together to publish guidelines for micronutrient requirements and proper supplementation in practical gastroenterology. Providers can use this paper and extensive table as a helpful guide for patients following a gluten-free diet. Firstly, it's not our standard practice to put all newly diagnosed celiac disease patients on a multivitamin, as we do know that nutrient deficiencies will often improve with healing on a gluten-free diet. Patients on a gluten-free diet can meet their needs through food alone, especially when the intestines have healed and absorption is equivalent to their non-celiac peers. But if patients have inadequate variety or other risk factors such as lactose intolerance, supplementation is often appropriate. We suggest recommending a multivitamin if nutritional inadequacies can't be alleviated through improved eating habits. We suggest considering a multivitamin or specific micronutrient supplements if nutrient deficiencies are found through lab work. And of course, we recommend a prenatal multivitamin for all pregnant or lactating patients. For all of my patients, I encourage them to increase variety to help ensure they are meeting their nutrient needs. That goal may be one new food or one new recipe per week or per month, depending on what they feel is manageable for them. I would like you to try out these goals I've listed here. The first is to prepare one new gluten-free recipe. It can be as simple or as complicated as you'd like. The second is to add one new naturally gluten-free food to your diet. I'm confident that all of you can reach these goals. I hope you discover some new foods and exciting recipes that make the gluten-free diet more enjoyable. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we are going to move to our cooking portion of the presentation. I think we're going to have a good amount of time for questions today, so please type your questions in the Q&A and we'll have all the panelists stay on after to answer questions. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay. Being a little slow, bear with me. Okay. All right, so our recipe today is developed by Vanessa Weisbrod. So Vanessa, do you want to just quickly talk about this recipe before we show the video?
Sure. So the recipe today is a crustless vegetable quiche. And really, the idea behind this was showing you how to make something that's naturally gluten-free, but uses lots of fresh vegetables and ingredients that are very easy to find in any grocery store. Um, I have suggested on here vegetables that I like to use and that you'll see in the video today. But what's really lovely about this recipe is that you can really do it with anything that you want. So if your family likes bacon or likes meat, you can put meat in it, or you can keep it with any veggies that you want. This is sort of a take. My kids like love the Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and all of the little egg bites that are gluten-free. It's the only thing they can eat in those locations. And so this is really like a homemade version that's super, super easy to make. You can prepare it the night before. It stays in the refrigerator. It stays for a couple of days after you bake it, so you can just heat it up in the microwave. It's great for breakfast. It's great for lunch, and just so many ways to make it your own. So I hope you like it as much as I do. Welcome to the kitchen. Today we are making one of my favorite breakfast recipes. It's really easy to fall into a rut of eating really high calorie, nutrient void foods for breakfast. Things like packaged muffins or bars, and forgetting about wholesome ingredients first thing in the morning. But I hope that today's recipe will convince you that you can have the great ingredients first thing in the morning too. So something I was actually thinking as I was setting up to make this quiche recipe, and I was telling my husband as I was getting the ingredients out, is that it actually took me longer to prepare this recipe for this cooking video than it would on a normal day. So if I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I really want this baked egg crustless quiche for breakfast, I grab the eggs, I grab whatever vegetables or ingredients are in my fridge, I whisk it all up and I toss it into the oven. Today I made it really pretty. So today actually probably doubled my prep time, but I want you to know that this is a super easy recipe. Anyone can make this on any weekend. Even if you have kids that have 3 soccer games and dance classes, you can do it and you can have a wholesome, hearty breakfast any weekend. So here we have on my cutting board, we have a dozen eggs that I've already cracked. We have a cup of milk. Most recipes for quiches will tell you to use whole milk or heavy cream. I use 2% milk. There's absolutely no reason to have to use heavy cream in this dish. Use any milk you like. Use oat milk, almond milk, soy milk, you name it, any milk will work. It doesn't matter. I am doing a vegetarian quiche today. So we have tomatoes, we have scallions, we have some cheddar jack cheese, broccoli, and some shiitake mushrooms. You can put anything you want in this quiche. If you like peppers, throw them in. Bacon, prosciutto, pepperoni, whatever. Whatever's in your fridge, whatever tastes good to you and your eggs, throw them in this dish. The sky is the limit. The seasonings for me are what really hit home. This is a really, really simple blend of onion powder, garlic powder, sweet paprika, and a little bit of salt and dried parsley. Super simple, mix it all together. It really makes a difference in your eggs. Don't forget the seasoning. You can also put some fresh herbs in this at the end, which also give it a really bright taste. So let's get started. I'm just gonna simply whisk together my eggs. And as I'm doing that, I'll go ahead and pour in the milk. This is about 1 cup of milk. And you want to whisk it until your eggs are nice and broken up. Now I'm going to add my seasonings right into the egg mixture so that they get nice and whisked in all together and evenly distributed. And that's all you have to do for the eggs. They're ready to go into the pan. Now, some people will argue that when you're making a quiche, you should stir all of your ingredients right into your egg mixture while it's still in the bowl. I'm not on that team. I like to actually pour my egg mixture into the pan that I'm gonna bake with. I have a Corningware dish here that I just sprayed with a little bit of nonstick spray so everything doesn't stick. I like to pour my egg mixture in first. And then I like to add my ingredients. You can really do this in any order. I like to do it this way, but because you never know with vegetables. They're all slightly different sizes. The tops of your broccoli could be different sizes, a little bit larger, a little bit smaller. And I don't like to overfill my pan. And if you put all of the ingredients into the bowl, you may not be perfectly sure how full your pan is gonna get, especially if you're improvising by whatever is in your fridge and you didn't carefully measure out all of the ingredients. So I like to do it this way so that I can keep a close eye on how full my dish is getting. We don't wanna fill this all the way to the top because as the eggs bake, they are going to puff up and expand. And it's one of the ways that you'll know that your dish is done. The eggs will puff and they'll pull away from the sides and it will set all the way around. That's how you'll know it's ready to take out of the oven. So we've got mushrooms, we've got our broccoli. It's going to be such beautiful colors. Tomatoes, scallions. And last but certainly not least, this is a cheddar jack blend of cheese. Now I'm going to leave a little bit of cheese on the end just for a moment. I'm going to stir this all together so it gets nice and mixed around. And the cheese gets worked through all the way of the eggs so that you don't want all of your cheese just on top or else you don't have the cheesy bite at the very bottom too. So I like to make sure that we have our ingredients very thoroughly mixed in so that you get even bites throughout your quiche. And then I'm going to top it with the rest of my cheese and pop it in the oven. All right, so this is going to bake at 375 degrees for about 45 to 50 minutes. So you have a nice time. You can go make yourself a cup of coffee, read a book, enjoy the morning while it bakes. Now our quiche is out of the oven. You can see it's perfectly golden. It's pulled away from the edges and it's completely set in the middle. So we know that this is done. I'm gonna let this cool for about 5 minutes before we dig in, and then we'll have an amazing nutrient-packed breakfast.
Looks so beautiful. All right, so we are
Welcome to the
officially in the Q&A portion of this presentation. As Emma put in the chat, we will not be sharing the slides directly after the presentation, but you can always access a recorded version of this presentation on our culinary medicine webinars webpage. So Emma will share the link for that in the chat, and you can always look up culinary medicine on celiac.org and it'll come up as well. Now for quick surveys, we do have post-event surveys that we would like you to fill out. Again, there are links for patients and caregivers and then healthcare providers. And the healthcare provider one is particularly important, again, so that we can record your information in case you have issues accessing your CEU or CME. So I will ask Emma to share those in the chat in case you missed scanning the QR code. And then I'll just share this one more time. So again, if you're a healthcare provider, we do need you to register with Boston Children's Hospital in order to receive your CME or CEU transcript. So the information is here. It's also in the chat, and we will share it one more time. I'm going to leave the surveys up while I pull up the Q&A. Just give me one moment. There was one question that came in early on in the webinar, and I know Dr. Du answered it in the chat, but I'm wondering if we can start by just verbally, Non, if you could repeat that. Is there a recommendation on how much rice is safe to consume?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And unfortunately, there isn't like any formal recommendation from the US in terms of how many. And also, this question will probably vary between kid and an adult. But I usually try to say to keep it under 4 servings per week. I think there was a study done in Sweden, is where I've been referencing that. And I did also want to stress there's other ways to reduce arsenic in terms of making sure you wash your rice several times with water, which you're supposed to do anyway before you cook. And then also, I think I saw someone asking me about questions of what other grains could you use besides rice. And so I would say like quinoa, amaranth, and then millet are other options you can consider. And so that's why I wanted to say it's not to avoid it completely because I think rice is a great way to have in your diet. But there's also depending on where the rice has been grown, can also have different levels of maybe heavy metals as well. So that's why I think it's just you can have some in your diet, but to not maybe eat it every day for 2, 3 of the meals that you're having.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is, any suggestions for upping folate in a newly diagnosed 2-year-old with celiac disease who is very picky about texture and references like fruits and beans, skids and veggies? That can be a challenge. Jessica, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, so generally what I promote when there's low folate is one is really focusing on some of the gluten-free whole grains. So maybe choosing breads or pastas, tortillas, wraps that actually incorporate some of those gluten-free whole grains as ingredients, but also just more general variety. So as I mentioned when I was talking about folate, there are so many different sources of folate. And what I find mostly in my patients, the ones who are falling short of it just don't have enough variety of different types of foods overall in their diet. So mixing up the proteins, mixing up the vegetables, the fruits, the whole grains, etc. I do have a handout on specific food sources of folate that I'm happy to share. But I think focusing on maybe some of the higher folate foods, but really focusing on the variety as well.
Great, thank you. I see a question in the chat about picky eating. Someone has a very picky, newly diagnosed 10-year-old, and they're looking for resources. We did do a webinar for culinary medicine specifically on picky eating. We did it last fall. So I'm going to again reference that webpage that Emma keeps sharing in the chat, but there is a full webinar on that with a lot of good tips, which I encourage you to check out. Could gluten cause other food intolerances like sugar, dairy, and certain types of rice?
Like not eating that gluten, or
Yeah, I guess having celiac disease, being on a gluten-free diet, could that cause other food intolerances?
I don't think that it would necessarily cause those food intolerances. And Dr. Du can speak to this as well. I do find many of my patients do also have food intolerances, but I don't know that it's just because they've eliminated gluten from their diet or just because they have celiac disease. There might be other co-occurring conditions or intolerances. And sometimes we just have to figure out what is really the main trigger for them, or is there any other underlying condition that may cause them not to tolerate these broader categories like sugar and dairy and rice? And if you're fully healed from celiac disease where your villi have grown back, you should have potentially gotten all of the enzymes to digest some of these foods like dairy and certain carbohydrates. And so you might be able to tolerate some of those foods better once you've actually healed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I was going to add is just that, as you know, celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder, and so there can be other autoimmune disorders that you could potentially be at risk for, and some that we have maybe mentioned in the presentation include like type 1 diabetes, and another one we didn't quite mention, but maybe not as clear, is eosinophilic esophagitis. So there can be some overlap, and so but there's no direct, I think, mechanism per se in terms of that it's causing more allergies or sensitivities. But we also know that there's an overlap of irritable bowel syndrome and celiac disease. And so I think the experience of it can definitely still be there. And so that's why I think it's important, though, to always work with like an RD and your MD and talking about it to make sure, and when you're trying to figure out what things trigger your symptoms, that you're not missing other nutrients that you need.
Great, thank you. This is a really important question that came in a few different ways. So trying gluten-free grains, there's concern about the risk for cross-contamination in these products. So how do you advise your patients to handle this?
So any grain-based product, I recommend having a gluten-free label on it. So it should be tested to be below 20 parts per million, which is considered safe for somebody with celiac disease. So if you are buying grains or grain-based products, you will want to look for that gluten-free label. If you're someone who's more sensitive or you've been advised to be a little stricter, you may want to choose certified gluten-free labels. Oats is its own whole topic, but obviously that you really want to make sure that it's labeled gluten-free. But if it is gluten-free or labeled gluten-free, you should be able to trust that.
Yeah. Yeah. Vanessa, a question for you. Suggestions for storing and reheating the crustless quiche.
Yeah, so it depends on what container you cooked it in originally. So if I do it in a glass baking dish or the Corningware dish, my set has a lid that comes with it. And so I'll actually just cool it to room temperature and then put it in the refrigerator with that lid on it. You could also cover it with plastic wrap if you're going to eat it, that day or the next day. If you don't have a lid to the container that you cooked it in, you could put it in a Tupperware container, just any airtight container that can go in the refrigerator. And then the microwave to reheat it.
Yeah, great. Um, Dr. Du, I'm wondering if you can take this one. Can you explain why iron is less well absorbed if the intestinal lining is healed on a strict gluten-free diet?
I think to clarify, when I was talking about that, I was first mentioning the many reasons why iron deficiency can persist, But I think the reason why when you're on a gluten-free diet, you could still have low iron, maybe two reasons. One, we know that gluten-free foods are not as fortified with iron, so you may just not be getting enough in your diet. And then building off of that, potentially just how you've been eating, maybe there's just not enough iron in your diet. Like with your villi is healed and absorbing, it should be able to get it. But if you're not putting enough in, that could be a reason. And you might not be putting enough in because of just how certain things that are usually fortified with iron you're not able to take.
Great, thank you. Okay, there are so many questions in here. We're going to do our best. Jessica, someone is asking about the difference between products with a gluten-free label and a gluten-free certification. And can you explain the difference?
Yeah. So a gluten-free label means that the company is testing the product to be below that 20 parts per million threshold. And that's within the company. But those labels in America at this time are voluntary. So we trust the individual company to do their testing, but the FDA or the government is not going into each individual product to make sure it's compliant before it goes to the market. So that's why certification agencies came about to come in, double check the testing that's being done. And a lot of them are 20 parts per million. Some of them are a bit stricter. And if it meets their guidelines, then those products will leave with a certified gluten-free label. But it does cost more money and time for those companies. So not every company can get a certified gluten-free label on their product. Smaller companies might not be able to do that. So you don't only need to eat certified gluten-free. Obviously, you don't only need to eat things with a gluten-free label. Obviously, naturally gluten-free foods like fruits and vegetables and water and milk and things don't necessarily have a gluten-free label and they can still be fine. But obviously, it can feel good to see a certified gluten-free label.
I'll just add that I wouldn't say that a certified label should give you more trust than a gluten-free label because there are a lot of companies that choose not to go the certified route largely because of the cost of it. And some of those companies have actually invested in in-house laboratories, like extremely qualified lab techs to test their products, where they're actually pulling products off the line every single hour to test in-house. So it is, if there's products that you really like that aren't certified, it's worth learning how those companies are testing their products because there's some really cool setups going on at these companies to make sure the gluten-free products are safe.
Yeah. Vanessa, I have another question for you. Do you suggest sauteing the vegetables before adding them to the eggs?
That is an excellent question. So, if you want to, is the answer. So I didn't in that video, and I typically don't when I'm making this dish, largely because of time. This is something that I make when I just want everything to be able to be thrown in and be done really quickly and taste great. And I don't want to have the added step of having to very nicely saute everything first. But of course, you absolutely could, and there's no reason you can't. It will work just the same.
Yeah. One last step if you don't, right?
Right.
Okay, this is a question that I feel like we see online as kind of one of the celiac myths that comes up a lot. So, are fruits that have coatings sprayed on them still gluten-free? How can we find out what the coating is made of? Yeah, I can start. Um, so there is no evidence to show that fruits and vegetables are a problem for people with celiac disease, despite the coatings. We don't actually, um, we see people eating fruits and vegetables without problems who are getting follow-ups all the time, and it's not a concern. So I would say that's kind of a myth that we do not believe is a problem.
I'll also add, please wash your produce. Like people are in the grocery store, they're touching it, they're sneezing. It's, flu and cold season. Like wash your produce and, remove anything that might be on it. So.
Yeah. Um, a lot of people are sort of asking this question in different ways, but I'm wondering, any advice for helping people find recipes or getting nutrients in their diet when they have multiple restrictions beyond the gluten-free diet? I think this can be more challenging. And Jessica, I don't know if when you work with someone who has both celiac disease and another food intolerance, kind of what is your approach for making sure they get the most nutrient dense version of that diet?
Yeah, and I think this is extremely common. I would say it's almost rare that I have someone who is just gluten-free, and also everyone has their own preferences. So I think that this is common, and the more restrictions you have, obviously, the more limited you are and the more difficult it can be to get all these nutrients in. But that's why I would say working with a dietitian to really get individualized recommendations is probably the best thing. With my patients, I go through everything that they're eating for each of their meals. I'm looking at, are they getting enough protein? Are they getting enough calcium? Are they getting enough vegetables in their diets, fruits? So I think what I would say as a dietitian is to work with a specialized dietitian who can evaluate your diet and make sure you're hitting all of the nutrients that you need, and also having follow-up lab work. Are you actually deficient in any of these nutrients? Are you in a place where your levels are good? So I think it absolutely can be done no matter what your restriction is. And if it can't, that's what I talked about at the end. That's where we decide supplementation may be necessary.
Great. Thank you. Okay, that is all the time we have for questions today. We do have a full lineup of culinary medicine webinars scheduled for the rest of the year. So we have our next one is going to be in April, and then the one after that will be in June. So you can scan the QR code here to find the sign up pages for those webinars. I also should have added this to the slide, but I'm going to ask Emma to share in the chat the link to our new nutrition education program, which has been developed with our Dietitian Advisory Council and takes you through a series of nutrition focused webinars that are sort of complementary to this culinary medicine series, but we go through really the details of the gluten-free diet. And that program starts this Thursday on February 3rd. So if you are interested in culinary medicine and nutrition education, please check out our future webinars. We are really excited to be able to offer these programs free of charge for all participants. So thank you so much. And with that, I will close the webinar. Thank you to the speakers